Okay, so coming up on October 19th and going for 4 Thursdays in a row from 7 to 8:30 p.m. U.S. Central Time, Spencer Hess and myself are going to be talking about this book, The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture by Wendell Berry. It's a classic. It was first published in 1977. And as you might imagine from the title, it deals with agriculture, the environment, society, and culture. So I thought maybe we could just tell folks a little bit as to why we like this book this much. Spencer, do you remember even when you first read this book?
I mean, I think it was when I did an independent study with you back in college, if
Yeah.
I remember correctly.
How did you hear about it?
I don't know. Probably from Michael Pollan originally.
That's right.
I view most of his like middle career work as really just like popularizing Wendell Berry's like agrarian perspective.
Mm-hmm. Did we read Michael Pollan first? I think
I
maybe we did. Yeah. And then we read that big long book by Cochrane on the history of agriculture. So I was pretty prepared to read Wendell Berry's book. But we don't want to mislead people into thinking it's all about ag, like the technicalities of ag, right? Like,
um I mean, I would describe reading it the first time as like fairly traumatic for me. And so like sort of intellectually and like emotionally traumatic because at that time Um, people weren't really using this word, but like by the time I met you in college, I was some sort of a post-liberal. Like I kind of thought my way out of like any kind of mainstream liberal position, like Republican or Democrat or whatever. But even reading this book, so I would say it's less about like agriculture and more about, or at least when you were saying, it's not about like the techniques of agriculture,
mm-hmm.
it's about like an agrarian worldview and how from Wendell Berry's agrarian perspective like America has gone off the rails hundreds of years ago. um, if you really take seriously like an agrarian perspective and for lack of a better term like the natural law grounding of an agrarian perspective, it's hard to square how really any of us are living our lives in modern America.
Mm-hmm. It
Um,
does it makes you take a large step back and have a much more wide angle view of current American culture, right?
and put another way, it reveals how parochial we are,
Right.
because it is a radical critique um, of I don't think he exactly calls it this, but it's a radical critique of like liberalism.
That's just terminology. He's talking about the same thing.
Yeah,
And
and I would say part of where I'm not fully on board with him is he is still some like right liberal Jeffersonian. He's trying to hold on to a kind of agrarian Whig conception of society. So that there's a certain amount of incoherence, I would argue,
yeah,
uh, with his
and,
total worldview. It's still a great
right.
book, but
Yeah, yeah. And I think that might give people an idea that as we approach this book, we're not going to be simply, putting it forth uh, without a critical lens. I mean, we're going to talk about both all the good points that he does make, and then maybe some things that he misses or that might complete the picture. Like what I'm hearing you say is that he doesn't necessarily take his radical insights and and like completely uncover their ultimate potential, right?
probably where he doesn't take it to an extreme that I think would be logical.
I mean, if it weren't for Wendell Berry, we probably would not be here, right? Like,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, actually, because the man's writings have been so inspirational to us. I mean, we read it again in a book group with a bunch of other people, and we read several other things by Wendell Berry.
Right.
And actually, people should know he sent us author's notes. Like one of our colleagues, Miriam, wrote to him and let him know about this class. And he wrote back and sent us some notes that we can use in the class. He kind of said, well, I'm not quite, wanting to like attend. He's a busy man. He's getting a little bit older, but he took the time to write us and give us some points that he wanted us to make. So we're really stoked about that.
Will be really.
Yeah, yeah. I like the fact that Barry puts together agriculture, environment, economics, culture, all these things, and even spirituality is in the mix in his writing, makes him very similar to what the Morin Academy is doing. That's what we're doing. We're putting all those things together and we're trying to see how they relate to each other. And that's a rare thing because for the most part, people write about and talk about one thing or another, his contribution is tied up with I hate to say multidisciplinary because that sounds too fancy, but like he doesn't just look at this from one lens. I don't know, maybe you can explain this better than I do.
I don't. I mean, I would just restate that he has like a radical perspective, and like from that, it's hard to only be in one discipline if you feel like everything is connected to everything else.
Right. Everything's connected to everything else. And as we do our work in the Morin Academy, I think that's the hardest thing for us to explain to people. People want to study one aspect or another. For instance, they might want to study Marx, or they might want to be in the communal reading group, or they might be attracted to, a class on succession planting. But to see the relationship amongst those, that's the hard part. And that's what Wendell Berry does really well. So he's somebody to emulate.
And I would say going beyond that, he's tried to integrate those ideas with his life. And it's a smaller percentage of the population, even that starts connecting the dots intellectually to then connect it to their lives. Because we like these comfy compartmentalized splits.
Yeah.
And that's one of the core things he's attacking, or vice versa. I'd say more so he's critiquing the idea that we can fundamentally undermine rural life and sane agriculture and yet not have an insane, decadent society.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, irregardless of what people believe, that's our world. That's American society.
Right.
That's what all wagons are hitched to.
I figure we're probably going to scare some people, and that's good. No, I mean that in a good way, right? Like to begin to kind of critique our culture and our economy at that level is frightening because it suggests that we would be better off living a different life, right? Not just that the planet would be better off, but that we would genuinely be better off. Because we would, tied into his writings is a love of community, friendship, human relations, which are at the core of human nature.
Place.
Yeah, right. Place being essential to community and friendship, which is, again, like challenging and scary, I think, for people today, because we've pulled those things apart. We don't think that place has much to do with friendships and relationships and community. We move too much, or we have like relationships at a distance and so on. Yep. So
La Raza that we use to change it how we want, or something right to be consumed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And he talks about our romance with technology, the way we sort of uncritically love it and adapt it or adopt it, and then allow it to kind of dominate us. Many people think that Barry is a little bit too anti-technology, so that might be something that we'll discuss, whether he is indeed anti-technology or exactly what he's talking about. But you know, I would agree with him that we do have a sort of romance with technology. It's like we turn, you know, like who was it I was reading? Oh, I think the guy's name is Green. He wrote A Smart Enough City, and he used the term tech goggles. And he said, you know, when people make decisions, when they're in love with technology, they put on these tech goggles and they can't see any other option. And then the technology is adopted for its own sake. But Barry also talks about the adoption of technology for the sake of national power, right? So that's another level that we'll have to talk about.
Which is one of our central delusions in our culture, is that somehow or other agriculture isn't tied up with warfare.
The turn in the 1970s when Earl Butz, the defense secretary, right? Or was he the
Ag secretary?
He was the ag secretary. He sounded like the defense secretary,
Well,
basically said.
they're very point in bringing him out, that he's talking about agriculture as a subsection of the American military.
Mm-hmm. All right. So he said what was actually probably already the reality, which is that food is a weapon, is what he said. And so that stuck in Barry's mind. And, you know, because it's so incongruous and so really morally corrupt.
And I would say everybody should read it. Even if you don't go to this class, you should get it in print or an audiobook or whatever.
So let's talk a little bit about the structure of this. We're going to do things a little different this time around. We've been teaching classes for a while now at the Morin Academy. If you aren't aware of what we've already done, check out what we've done on our website, and we'll make sure there's a link to that. In this one, I think Spencer and I are agreed that we don't want to do a formal class. We want to do more of a conversation. So we're going to go back and forth over these 4 weeks, each of us taking in turn about a quarter of the book. I think I'm going to go first, and I will, you know, kind of hit the highlights and my thoughts about the first 2 chapters, for instance. And then I'll ask Spencer what he thinks. We'll have a bit of a conversation. And then we'll open it up for a conversation with the participants. And then we'll move to you and we'll do it again, you know, the next week. And that way we're having a bit more of a conversation, a little bit more spontaneous give and take that should elicit more from the audience whom we want to hear from, right?
Because does the world really need another lecture series just on this book?
Yeah.
I don't think. But you know, if we can sort of create like a forum where people talk about these ideas and try and imagine how they could apply them to their lives, I think that's what we'd both really like to accomplish, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In whatever area of life you're in, whatever occupation you're in, and people can carry on the conversation after they're done with the session too. We have a Slack group that we always invite people to join, and they can converse with each other afterwards and, you know, keep that going. We especially welcome anybody who is involved at any level in farming, even if it's just gardening or small farming or any farming. I think we welcome them. We also welcome people who are environmentalists, people who are concerned about the earth.
I mean, one of the classic lines from this is that eating is an agricultural act. And we're all eating.
Right. Yeah, right. So it applies to all of us. I bet a lot of people haven't thought of it that way, or if they have, they only think in terms of maybe buying organic, maybe. So
That's
we've
something
only,
now, if you can't even see the connection between agriculture and your diet, you know,
right.
how are the other connections in life?
Hmm. Yep. So this hits everybody uh where they are at. And um, like if people think that we're going to lecture them about uh not eating meat or whatever, this is not where we're coming from either. It's more complicated than that. Berry argued against the people that wanted to more or less do things like that or just preserve the wilderness for its own sake. He talked about it being necessary that human beings steward the land, and the diversified farming with animal husbandry was a good use of it. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. But he would make a case for buying local, would he not?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I mean, he believes in building local community.
Which can only happen if you buy local, because there has to be an economy, at least in the current situation. There has to be an economy for there to be a community.
Right. It is necessary but insufficient.
Right. So we're going to have to talk about the demise of rural, small towns, and the process that he gets into this in the first of the book, the process by which they have been decimated over time and why. You should read this book. You don't have to read this book before coming. We're not assuming that you have read it, but we hope you will. And if you haven't, you will after you take the class and have the discussions, because you'll want to. So don't be intimidated if you don't have time to read the book, because we will not assume that you have. Like, we just want to start the conversation and give people the general understanding of his argument.